The internet thinks something happened to Jim Carrey. Not just a new haircut, not just aging, something deeper. When he stepped onto the stage at the 2026 César Awards in Paris, even longtime fans said the same thing. That's not the Jim Carrey we remember. But the real story didn't start in Paris. It started years ago, when he told the world he didn't exist.
I don't exist.
The day Jim Carrey died, it didn't start in Paris. It started the moment Jim Carrey looked into a red carpet camera and calmly said,
There is no me.
That single sentence fractured the public image people had carried for decades. This was the same man who built a career on rubber-faced comedy and explosive energy, and now he was standing there, almost serene, explaining that Jim Carrey was just a character, not a personality, not a fixed identity, a construct. To most viewers, it sounded like a breakdown. Headlines framed it as a spiral. Social media called it strange. But if you listen closely, it wasn't chaos. It was deliberate. He wasn't slurring or ranting. He was dismantling his own persona in real time. He described building Jim Carrey as something designed to be liked, something crafted. And once you realize that, you begin to see the shift differently. This wasn't a man losing himself. It was a man publicly rejecting the mask that made him famous. And when someone tears down the identity the world recognizes, it feels like a death. Not a physical one, but a symbolic one. That's why so many people say, the old Jim is gone. Because in a way, he told us that himself. But that wasn't an isolated moment. It was the first visible crack in something much bigger. After those interviews went viral, a new theory took over the internet. People claimed he was exposing Hollywood. They pointed to his strange grin on late-night television, the infamous triangle hand gesture, and his sarcastic comments about secret clubs. To some, it looked like coded rebellion. The idea spread fast. Jim Carrey had turned against the machine. But here's where the story gets complicated. If someone in Hollywood genuinely threatens powerful systems, they don't usually stay employed at the highest level. They disappear quietly. Yet during this so-called exposure phase, Carrey remained front and center, starring in major studio productions and anchoring billion-dollar franchises. That doesn't align with the narrative of a silenced whistleblower. It suggests something else. Maybe those gestures weren't confessions. Maybe they were satire. Carrey has always blurred the line between sincerity and performance. His humor thrives on exaggeration and absurdity. When he mocked the Illuminati symbolism on television, it carried the same tone as his earlier comedic personas. Playful, provocative, intentionally over the top. But the internet doesn't process satire slowly. It accelerates it. Clips get isolated, context disappears, and suddenly a joke becomes evidence. That's when the myth started building momentum. And once momentum builds online, it doesn't slow down. It mutates. Then came the deeper layer, the spiritual symbolism. Over the years, Carrey has spoken openly about consciousness, ego death, and religious allegory. He referenced biblical metaphors, alchemical ideas, and the concept of internal transformation. One of the most circulated clips involves him describing a symbolic, sacred secretion, an esoteric belief tied to ancient mystical interpretations of scripture. In certain fringe spiritual circles, this idea suggests that preserving life force energy leads to enlightenment. Now, there is no scientific evidence that such practices alter bone structure or eye color. But that didn't stop the theory from evolving. Online communities began connecting his philosophical language to physical changes in his appearance. They framed it as biological alchemy, a literal transformation of the body through spiritual discipline. The more symbolic his interviews became, the more literal the internet interpreted them. But Carrey has always spoken in metaphor. He paints with language the same way he paints on canvas, abstract, layered, emotional. When he talks about Christ consciousness or alchemy, he's describing inner experience, not physical mutation. The problem is, symbolism spreads faster than explanation. And once people believe a transformation is mystical, every new image becomes proof. When he appeared in Paris in 2026, the visual difference shocked people. His hair was darker and longer. His jawline looked softer. His skin appeared smoother under bright stage lighting, and his eyes, which many remembered as deep brown, looked lighter in certain shots. But cameras distort. Lighting shifts pigment. Aging redistributes facial fat. In your late 50s and early 60s, collagen changes naturally. Cheek structure can appear higher or fuller, depending on weight fluctuations. Even hydration impacts facial sharpness. Add professional styling, tailored grooming, and high-definition lenses, and you have a dramatically different image. Some speculated about cosmetic enhancements. That's possible. Many public figures make subtle adjustments over time. But subtle procedures don't equal supernatural rebirth. The human face evolves constantly. Compare photos of anyone across a decade, and you'll see a different version staring back. The shock comes from contrast. When audiences mentally freeze a celebrity at their peak era, any deviation feels extreme. But extreme doesn't mean unnatural, it means unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity breeds speculation faster than logic ever could. The three-stage transformation theory. Online analysts began mapping his life onto an ancient alchemical framework: destruction, purification, rebirth. They labeled his darker, introspective years as the blackening phase, the symbolic death of ego. They framed his retreat into art and spirituality as purification. And they declared his Paris appearance the final rebirth, the merging of masculine and feminine into a perfected state. It sounds cinematic, almost mythic. And that's exactly why it spread. Humans love narrative symmetry. We crave stories with clear arcs and symbolic completion. When someone changes dramatically over a decade, we instinctively organize it into stages. But here's the overlooked detail. You can retrofit almost any life into a three-act structure, especially a celebrity life filled with public reinvention. Carrey's journey from slapstick icon to philosophical painter feels dramatic because we experienced it in headlines and viral clips. But reinvention isn't ritual. It's often reflection. The internet didn't uncover a hidden ceremony. It constructed one. And once a transformation story becomes poetic, it becomes powerful, regardless of whether it's factual. Fame freezes you in time. The version of Jim Carrey that millions fell in love with was energetic, elastic, loud. But that persona was built in his 20s and 30s. Imagine carrying that version of yourself into your 60s while the world demands you stay the same. At some point, something fractures. Carrey has openly discussed depression, identity confusion, and the weight of expectation. When you build a character for mass approval, separating yourself from that character later can feel like survival. Psychologists call this identity deconstruction. It's not mystical, it's human. As people age, especially after personal loss and career peaks, they often reevaluate everything. Beliefs shift, appearance shifts, energy shifts. But when an average person does it, no one notices. When a global icon does it, it becomes spectacle. What we're witnessing may not be a cult ascension. It may be a man redefining himself after decades of performance. And that kind of transformation is unsettling, not because it's supernatural, but because it's relatable. It reminds us that identity is fragile. When he delivered that speech in fluent French and referenced coming full circle, it amplified everything. The symbolism sounded intentional. The tone felt ceremonial. And to those already convinced of a grand transformation, it was confirmation. But actors often prepare multilingual remarks for international events. It signals respect and professionalism. As for the square becoming circle metaphor, that phrase has existed in philosophy for centuries. It represents integration, completion, harmony between the physical and the spiritual. It doesn't require secret societies to function. It functions as poetry. The real impact of that moment wasn't coded language. It was contrast. The contrast between who people remembered and who stood on that stage. That gap created cognitive shock. And when shock meets symbolism, the imagination takes over. But here's the grounded truth. The body didn't vanish. The man didn't get replaced. What changed was alignment. The version of himself he once performed no longer matches the one he feels comfortable embodying. And when a public figure sheds an old skin, audiences grieve it like a loss. Not because something sinister happened, but because familiarity did.